When I was young, I really admired the stories surrounding Ernest Hemingway, how he'd fought in the Spanish Civil War, hunted sharks, climbed up the ranks of the Parisian elites, and how he downed his favorite alcoholic drink 14 times in one sitting. In my eyes, he was the apparent pinnacle of masculinity, strong, interesting, fearless, and willing to live life to its very limits, even if it killed him. However, as I got older, my ideas of what it means to be a man shifted from the cartoonish adventures of Hemingway to the far more mundane pledge towards personal values and virtue. The author of The Old Man and the Sea appeared to me increasingly one-dimensional. And then I picked up his biography written by Mary Dearborn. Her exploration of Hemingway's life is unique. Her words demonstrate that Hemingway was instead a big liar. Many of his stories are false, embellished, or difficult to prove. This did little to my already eroding opinion of the man, but her deep analysis of his personality, of his childhood, his interpersonal troubles, his periods of darkness, revealed to me a man I had not yet known. His facade was a defense against the instability stirring within. Nowhere is this more apparent than in his drinking, an issue that both elevated his own inner turmoil under the guise of self-medication and also encouraged itself as a symbol of masculine recklessness. Yes, Hemingway suffered from many afflictions, and one could argue that his drinking became the worst one of all. This video is sponsored by Babbel. After graduating from high school, I decided to take a year off and travel to Latin America. There I volunteered at a giant tortoise breeding center in the Ecuadorian islands of the Galapagos. Beyond the obviously amazing and beautiful wildlife, I also came to really appreciate and form relationships with the locals despite the language barrier. Over time, I actually picked up Spanish and fell in love with the language. To this day, so many years later, I still try to keep up with my Spanish, and I'm always looking to improve. Thankfully, there's Babbel, an app that offers a diverse set of methods, including podcasts, games, and lessons. Especialmente me gusta jugar a los juegos como Synchrospell. In this game, you have to guess the words before you run out of the fuel, really pushing you to perfect your grammar and word recognition as quickly as possible. For an additional price, you can also sign up for live virtual classes that are taught by certified teachers and help with maximizing speaking practice. Click on the link below and get up to 65% off Babbel. That's less than $5 a month to learn a language. To understand his alcoholism, it's important to also understand why he was driven to it. Someone living the life of Hemingway would undoubtedly want to numb the pain from time to time. Firstly, Hemingway was genetically unlucky. As he writes in A Movable Feast, families have many ways of being dangerous. This quote can be taken as a warning against the gradual determinism of familial madness, especially when we examine Hemingway's life. His father had suffered from unpredictable mood swings throughout his life. This would eventually lead to him taking his own. Ernest's mother suffered from insomnia, headaches, and was quite disagreeable. Additionally, 3 of the 6 siblings of Ernest's would take their lives. The chances that Hemingway inherited this doomed set of DNA is high, as he too exhibited serious mood swings and depression. In 1924 and 1934, Hemingway would experience rapid energy, producing a great deal of work in a short time span. These periods would be followed by apathy and low production. Nowadays, we may diagnose this as bipolar affective disorder. Hemingway would also discuss his depression throughout most of his life. As he writes to his mother, "Had never had the real old melancholia before, and am glad to have had it, so I know what people go through. It makes me more tolerant of what happened to my father." Later, he would write to a friend that he was living something like a Kafka nightmare. "I act cheerful, like always, but am not. I'm bone-tired and very beat up emotionally." Hemingway would consider taking his life jokingly throughout his life. At one point, he decided to seek treatment and was given electroconvulsive therapy up to 15 times. Some argue that this worsened his memory, one of the last things that made him happy. Brain trauma also followed Hemingway outside of the clinic, as he would survive 2 airplane crashes, one with a head fracture and, according to Andrew Farah, suffered at least 9 concussions as a result of drinking accidents and fighting. This trauma very likely could have been fueled by an apparent narcissism in Hemingway. He could be immediately cruel to those who he had initially treated with kindness. He demonstrated an unhealthy absorption in his own ideas to the point that he cared little for others, and he was incredibly competitive, spoiling activities for others and acting out recklessly for the sake of proving he was the toughest. This psychological profile, a biopsychosocial model first comprised by Dr. Christopher Martin, demonstrates a man possessed by darkness and plagued by thoughts of inadequacy and self-annihilation. It then makes sense when we look at one of the most consistent afflictions in Hemingway's life, his drinking, as it acted to self-medicate his pain and fuel his need for attention. Hemingway likely began drinking very early in life, around the age of 13 or 14. It should be noted that a common predictor of alcoholism is the age of the first drink, particularly when someone drinks before the age of 15. He began daily drinking in the 1920s around the end of his first marriage. His drinking would elevate as he grew distant from his mother, to a point in which, around 1937, he was first told by a doctor that he should abstain due to health concerns. Despite this, Hemingway continued to drink even when he won the Nobel Prize in 1953. Despite yet another desperate plea by his doctor in 1957, Ernest continued. When Hemingway was hospitalized and given shock treatment, we see a short period of moderation. In fact, this period of time saw Hemingway write A Movable Feast, in which he reflected on his days of youth in Paris. Unfortunately, this was a short period of moderation. Hemingway's memories faded and his depression returned. As Dr. Martin writes, he lost the ability to write, breaking down in tears when he could not summon words. His drinking picked back up, and on a July morning in 1961, he took his life in a similar fashion to his father. Hemingway has several quotes on drinking that you can now find on coasters and t-shirts. Many of them speak of alcohol as a medicine, such as when he wrote that modern life too is often a mechanical oppression and liquor is the only mechanical relief. Hemingway knew that when things got bad, he could always take a drink and right away they were much better. Alcohol, in some sense, was a defense mechanism, used to fight his depression and self-destructive thoughts. This can be seen as a dual diagnosis, in which an individual suffers from some sort of mental disorder and uses a substance to self-medicate, leading to substance abuse issues. Dual diagnoses influence each other. That is, a person who abuses alcohol can heighten the effects of their bipolar disorder. People with bipolar disorder might abuse alcohol as a way to try to treat their mental illnesses. It could be argued that his overdrinking was also a necessary component to his facade of hypermasculinity and self-sufficiency. Hemingway's entire identity revolved around drinking, around how much he could drink and the stories he could tell when he drank too much. This identity, too, may have been a defense mechanism against the dark and complex forces within him, providing simplicity and stability to his sense of self. Hemingway was known to compartmentalize in black and white ways, defining others as either heroes or jerks. The drinking likely calmed his emotional sensitivity to the world around him, making things easier to digest and in turn making himself more easily digestible as a manly man who drinks a lot and nothing more. Hemingway very likely suffered from alcoholism. Alcoholism is commonly defined as a condition in which a person has a strong desire to consume alcohol, even when it is in some way impeding upon their quality of life. Nowadays, health professionals tend to use the term alcohol use disorder rather than labeling someone as an alcoholic. 15.1 million American adults have some sort of alcohol use problem, according to the NUH, and according to the WHO, 3.3 million deaths per year are attributed to harmful alcohol use. Why is it so dangerous? Alcohol tends to disrupt GABA, a neurotransmitter commonly involved in controlling impulsiveness. It also disrupts glutamate, another neurotransmitter that stimulates the nervous system. From a psychological standpoint, this greatly depletes the effectiveness of the central nervous system in regulating our behavior. It makes sense as to why Hemingway lived a life of troubled interpersonal relationships as well as destructive decisions, as these two are common causes of excessive alcohol intake. One of the worst things about alcoholism is that the person who drinks too much likely won't be the first one to notice. Some of the signs may include drinking alone, losing interests in hobbies that you may have previously enjoyed, storing alcohol in unlikely places, not being able to remember the drinking period, and needing more alcohol to feel its effects. Another potential issue is that many consider binge drinking, or drinking a lot every once in a while, to be a fairly harmless activity, despite the fact that it regularly causes unintentional injuries and can lead to cancer and heart disease. Drinking, whether done in short, intense periods or in daily use, can cause a wide range of complications. Memory loss, liver disease, heart problems, domestic abuse, legal issues, and the worsening of mental illness are all common results of drinking too much. With Hemingway, the worsening of his health, the severity of his bipolar and depression, and his interpersonal issues all point to such complications. And he knew it. Hemingway made many attempts throughout his life to sober up and moderate, although he never reached a sustained period of sobriety. Why is it so difficult to quit? Addiction, whatever its form, has always been a desperate search on a false and hopeless path for the fulfillment of human freedom. It is an attempt to create a reality of our own liking. Addiction can be likened to Plato's cave allegory, like many things can. The story involves prisoners chained and imprisoned in a cave, where they can only face a rocky wall. They take the shadows on the wall as their reality. In a similar way, addicts are chained to their addictions and see the reality through the frame of their substance of choice. Daily routines are planned around drinking, and mornings are spent recovering so you can do it all over again. You forget a reality before, where socializing wasn't also mandatory drinking time, and where you were forced to acknowledge your problems. Then one day, one of the prisoners escapes and sees the outside world. As Peg O'Connor writes, the brightness of the light can be painful, as many alcoholic or drug-dependent people realize once their use stops. Those who drank or used drugs to numb feelings or avoid painful memories may feel defenseless. This is why they will retreat back to their familiar darkness of the cave, back with their drinking friends. They will find comfort. This is one way to understand relapse. How does one embrace the light? Zizek discusses the courage of hopelessness in terms of addiction. He argues that the awareness that you can stop smoking at any time you want guarantees that you will never actually do it. The possibility of stopping smoking is what blocks the actual change. It allows me to accept our continuous smoking without bad conscience. Then, after a period of intolerable hypocrisy, you declare that this is your last cigarette. So you really enjoy your last smoking session with this special honorable idea that this is your last one. Soon, this in itself becomes the addiction, and you once again have found a way to continue smoking in good conscience. Zizek argues the final step is to focus on this pathological obsession with stopping and starting smoking, rather than the act itself. What should be brought to an end is not smoking, but the very attempt to smoke. This focus causes a sense of despair, rendering you unable to enjoy smoking by itself, as well as smoking with the sense that you'll be able to stop. You feel hopeless, and as Zizek believes, the way out emerges unexpectedly when we accept the total hopelessness of our predicament. Acceptance is difficult but necessary, and it shouldn't be entirely defeatist. Instead, by taking into account all of the reasons why you drink, you may even render drinking as less appealing. Instead of thinking of one's addiction as something to overcome, you may even recognize that the obstacle is the way. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way, wrote Marcus Aurelius. For example, you may take note of when you drink, the triggers and causes of your compulsion. By observing the obstacle, you are able to understand its purpose and perhaps modify it. Only through addressing the core issues can you begin to adjust to the light. Ernest Hemingway had a brutally endless list of afflictions that drove him to drink. His inherited mental issues, his family struggles, his head trauma, and his need to prove himself resulted in his use of drinking as a defense mechanism, as a way to resist vulnerability. From a traditionally manly approach, we see a man who hid from reality through the controlling prison of addiction, rather than someone who accepted the hopelessness of their situation and nonetheless lived a life of sober autonomy. Perhaps, however, this is too cruel of an assessment. Who's to say that any of us could have properly dealt with the afflictions gifted to Hemingway? He lived in a time of great stigma around mental health, making it difficult for him to discuss his issues, and he likely received little sympathy or help from those closest. He was a sensitive man who felt every bit of life he encountered. It would make sense that somebody capable of absorbing so much would want to drown so much of it out. And what Hemingway could absorb, he more often than not put into words. The moral purpose forged through a man's heroic sense of responsibility, the significance of truth and honesty, the splendor of Cuba, the elegance of Paris. To stay in places and to leave, to trust, to distrust, to no longer believe and believe again, to care about fishes, the different winds, the changes of the seasons, to see what happens, to be out in boats, to sit in the saddle, to watch the snow come, to watch it go, to hear rain on the tent, to know where I can find what I want. Hemingway had another defense against the darkness within, writing. As he wrote to Fitzgerald about the troubled author, work was the thing that would save him if he would only bite the nail and get down to it. Honest work with honest fiction, a paragraph at a time. Despite the suffering he endured, Hemingway immortalized himself as one of the greatest writers of all time. When he did accept the tragedy and triumph of life, its beauty and its ugliness, he created some of the most beautiful art known today. Although he demonstrates the destructiveness of substance abuse, he also offers an image of hope through his writing, showing that art and love allows us to transcend our suffering rather than relish in it. As Dr. Martin quotes The Old Man and the Sea in reference to the author's legacy, man is not made for defeat. A man can be destroyed, but not defeated.